Hello everybody, great to see you here back on the channel again. Now, before I get onto today's topic, I want to just remind you that I have some 2025 Nightscape Images calendars ready for purchase. Now, to be honest, I've had these on the go for a little while already and they are walking out the door like hotcakes. Now this, I believe, is probably one of the best calendars that I have ever produced. I've got some fantastic images that I love each and every one of them. And I guess it relates to the experience I had whilst I was out there shooting them. So anyway, if you're interested in a calendar highlighting some of my photography, nice little compact package here, then please have a look down in the comments below and you'll see a link so you can purchase them anywhere in the world. All right, now today I would like to discuss Astro landscape photography from start to finish. Now, yeah, that's a pretty big assignment. So I think the best way for me to do that is to give you an insight into my mindset now, as opposed to when I was starting out doing this type of photography. And, you know, I think it's important to realize that a lot does change along any photography journey, and particularly one that relies so heavily on post-production like Milky Way imaging. So quite possibly, like all of you, I started out shooting simple single exposures of the night sky and landscape. And these were typically using an ultra wide angle lens. And that's just so I could fit as much as possible into the scene. And you know, I was able to get some okay images back then. And at the time, I was really happy with them. So here is my first piece of advice. Never despise your beginnings in photography. You know, many of us look back and cringe at our early attempts at shooting and vow never to show any of those images to anyone ever again. But I think it's quite healthy actually to be able to, I guess, rationally assess where we were then and compare to where we want to be in the future. You see, the biggest stumbling block to people starting along this Astro landscape photography road is simply that we stop and we don't push through the roadblocks. So will there be significant roadblocks? Yes, absolutely there will. Can we get past these frustrating challenges that seem to, I guess, drain our enthusiasm away completely? Yes, absolutely we can. But it's really hard to do that on your own. And I know that because that's exactly how I had to do it. There was hardly any information available back then on, well, YouTube or anywhere else for that matter. And what information was out there was pretty basic and generic at best. Fortunately, I already had a significant background in general photography, which held me in good stead for the technical challenges which kept cropping up. So here is my next important point. Be prepared to learn more about your camera and the basic principles of photography to progress further in Milky Way photography. Okay, now hang on. Many of you will say that you already know a lot about photography, and look, surely it can't be that difficult to get a shot of the stars and the landscape at night. Well, yes. Maybe I am actually saying that. But again, it all comes down to your perspective. And this relates to what I said a minute ago. What's the difference between an okay image and a great image? Perspective. Or to be even more clear about this, it's how we see things. So here are some of my earlier images. Now, these are pretty simple shots, and many of these are images I still love to this day. Are they technically perfect? No way. But they speak to me on a heart level and they bring back good memories. And that's something that's difficult to describe on a technical level. But here's where the rubber hits the road. No image will be any good if it's out of focus or so full of noise that we cringe every time we look at it. So getting a handle on the basics will be the initial building block to support every other thing we do with this hobby. And this leads me to my next important point. Don't skip over the basics and move on too soon to more complex and difficult shooting and editing practices. Wow, there's quite a lot to unpack with this. So, where do we start? Okay, well, what I'm seeing in recent days is that people have such an obsession with high-tech gear and gadgetry that they rush out and buy a star tracker. And soon after that, they send their camera off in to get an Astro modification done. So what's wrong with that, you may ask? After all, you have all of that stuff. Well, I can tell you that if I had done all of those things years ago, I would have suffocated under the technical challenges involved, and particularly in the shooting and editing later on. Something I keep saying, and I'll keep saying this till the cows come home, is this: you will never master creative astro landscape photography until you get comfortable with your gear. So things like the camera itself, tripods, shutter releases, all of the stuff that we need to shoot. When you have that level of ease with the gear, you can then spend the majority of your time creating an image. And right there, ladies and gentlemen, is where the magic actually happens. So something I've seen time and time again are people who are great photographers in daylight, only to struggle when the lights go out at night. Now, why is this? Well, I think it's largely related to the fact that we often rely heavily on the camera to do lots of the heavy lifting associated with photography. So things like autofocus, which is an obvious one, but semi-auto exposure modes. Now, all of these things become ineffective at night, and we quickly discover that we need to take total control of the camera. And many of us are found wanting in this regard because we don't quite know the basics of how the camera actually works. So creativity is the key to great photography on any level. It seems to come easy for some, and I guess many of us are left wondering why. But I can tell you that no matter how naturally gifted you may be, when it comes to Milky Way photography, you'll be quickly relegated back to the pack unless you spend considerable time working on understanding the technical aspects and, dare I say, some theory aspects of photography. Now, of course, this takes time, and I can tell you it's a whole lot easier when we begin with simple, basic images rather than getting straight into tracking and needing a degree in Photoshop to make our images look like those that we see on Instagram. You see, basic is good. It's always good. Start there, and if you're struggling with your Milky Way shooting, may I suggest taking a step backwards. Leave all the fancy gear at home and go back to taking images from a fixed tripod. Or even maybe just sit out there under the stars and take the time to remember why you wanted to do this in the first place. Now, you may well be surprised how quickly you see a composition form right before your eyes. You see, creativity has no boundaries, but it doesn't come without the cost of time, determination, and patience. So as the journey continues, we gradually embrace the challenges one by one. Soon you'll begin to see some progression in your work. I'd always recommend finding someone who inspires you. They can give you suggestions for locations to shoot, someone who's willing to keep you company out there on the cold and frosty nights. That never goes astray. And these little things are what I call the 1%ers. Small things that when you add them all together make a huge difference to our attitude and our enthusiasm for the task at hand. So over the years, I've discussed these things with hundreds, literally hundreds of photographers, and the story is always the same. We overcome obstacles one step at a time, but remember, it's our attention to detail, and that's coupled with a desire to improve ourselves that eventually overpowers the obstacles. We never get better at what we're attempting to do by not pushing ourselves, but not all at once, one step at a time. Then it's like we build our confidence one step at a time. We build our skill set one step at a time, and we accomplish our photography goals. Yep, you guessed it, one step at a time. So it's a lot easier to embrace photo stacking, for example, in our photography if we totally understand the basics of single image taking, because it's simply a matter of taking more than one of the same shot. Having an understanding of good composition is key to any form of photography. So take time to practice that. Look for subjects to shoot in daylight to enhance our understanding of the angles, the height, and the flow of an image. And then when we get back out there under the stars at night time, when it's a lot harder to do those things, you've already done the hard yards. So it's always tempting, and I'm guilty of this myself, to rush our nightscape photography. But the key is actually to slow down the process. Spend the time out there, and as well as that, enjoy that process. It's always worth it in the end. And as you may imagine, the more you add to the complexity of image capturing in the field, the more the editing, once you get back home, will also increase in difficulty. So here's my next key point. From the very beginning of our photography journey, learn to use photo editing software. As far as I'm concerned, the post-production aspect of Astro landscape photography is at least 50% of the work. And added to this is that if you make mistakes out in the field, this percentage can rise even further. You've got to fix it up later. So that's my next really important point. If it's at all possible, make sure you get everything right in camera before you leave the shooting location. We should never have the attitude that says, I'll fix it later in Lightroom or Photoshop. Many times this leads to disaster. Ask me how I know about that. All right, so once we have a rhythm and a routine with our photography, it gives us the opportunity to try new things. And this is where we may start looking at adding new equipment, such as star trackers. Now, a lot of people will say that once you track, you never go back. And while I totally understand the sentiment behind this statement, it does tend to dismiss a lot of what I've already mentioned here today. You see, as much as this may sound a bit counterintuitive, photography is not all about ultimate image quality. We so often get obsessed with this, and it leads us down the proverbial rabbit hole chasing perfection. So my strong advice to you is to embrace imperfection. Then learn to accept a level of compromise in your nightscape photography. Now, why would I suggest such a thing? Well, it's because I choose to focus on the journey rather than the destination. It's about overcoming challenges, and it's about trying to get a shot that may have eluded us for years. This is the real thing that many times we totally don't understand. The appeal of photography is the chase of the elusive subject, the ability to push through creative boundaries, and possibly most important of all, to feel better about ourselves in the process of doing that. So, do we always come away with a killer shot? Well, maybe not. But, does that really matter? Well, I reckon it probably shouldn't, as long as we enjoy what we're doing and getting the best out of ourselves. So, yeah, I do use a star tracker. Yes, I do have one of my cameras Astro modified. And for me, these are simply tools that help me in my creative process. So for me, this creative process is the focus of my work. The gear become the tools that help and enable me to achieve that. It's really funny, actually. In the beginning, we do so much research on the basic things like cameras and tripods and lenses. But once we have that sorted out, we begin to ask ourselves, okay, what am I going to shoot with all this new gear? So Astro landscape photography is a long and winding road, and like any road, it has a starting point and a finish. But I don't think we ever reach that point. The twists and the turns along the way are what makes the journey interesting. And my advice is to embrace that journey. Enjoy every aspect of it. So don't spend all of our energy pixel peeping small details, but rather keep our eyes on the big picture. Embrace the small victories along the way and fight through the challenges. And celebrate our achievements when they do occur. All right, so there's a lot in that. So to wrap up this video, here are my suggestions for shooting astro landscape images. Number one, begin simply with the basics. Spend time learning how your gear works, especially in the dark. Search for compelling compositions during the daytime. Embrace editing software. Make it your friend rather than your enemy. Learn to shoot in the field with an idea of how to edit the image in the back of your mind. Slowly add in new gear as the need arises, and do not rush this. Never ever lose sight of where you began the journey and why you began it in the first place. Enjoy each moment, because these will eventually become precious memories. So there you go. This video was never intended as a step-by-step how-to guide for Milky Way photography. The internet is full of those. I've got hundreds of those on my channel here even. But we must often ask ourselves this question: is my photography based on an obsession with new gear? Is it about the resulting images, or is it about the experience of being out there under the stars? So none of these are wrong, but I guarantee that when we realize how we're wired, what makes us tick, and what it is that makes us happy, that's when our photography will explode off the charts. The more we marry up our photography to our creative DNA, no matter how simple or complex that may look, well, that is when the stars align, quite literally. All right, well, anyway, thanks so much for tuning in today. I really do appreciate it. I'm always happy to chat further in the comments below. So until the next video, you have a fantastic week. I'll see you later, but don't forget, calendar down below. Thanks, guys.